Thanks for joining us for Leadership is Essential. We are here to talk about leadership and lessons learned. The purpose of this panel is to share the experiences of two dynamic leaders. Leaders are not born, but they are made. I want them to express the importance of leadership in our changing world, to note the significance that anyone can lead anytime and anywhere, and why we need everyone to step up and move into leadership positions, and how we can apply the leadership principles we have learned to make change and to make our lives better. I'm happy to have Dr. Ron Matson, Dean of the Fairmount College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, Wichita State University, and Mr. Sean Rojas, Director of Community Initiatives, Kansas Leadership Center. So, my first question will be directed to Dean Matson. Why is it so difficult to get people to move into leadership positions?
Well, I think that, people who are evolving in their careers find it very difficult, I think, to see themselves as leaders sometimes. Mm-hmm. And when offered the opportunity to lead, they very often look in the mirror instead of getting an objective point of view about their real skills. And that objective point of view frequently doesn't come from looking in the mirror, but comes from listening to other people. And I think we trust the judgment of other people to let us know whether we have the ability to lead or not. But for most of us, I think it's like, I'm not sure I can do this, and so I want to be kind of tentative about it. And rather than rushing in full speed to take over, we're tentative. Mm-hmm. And I think people need encouragement and support to make those transitions into leadership.
But I think people still have that idea in their mind that leaders are born and not made, and that you can develop those skills over time. And so they think that you just are somehow destined to be. And I think that that's truly is a myth.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's true. We don't, I think, appraise our own skills set very well. Mm-hmm. And as a result, we don't see ourselves inside of that genre of leader. But I want to support what you're saying, and that is absolutely, we learn to lead. Mm-hmm. We're not born that way. Mm-hmm. And it could be that those skills are inculcated fairly early, or maybe they come along later. Mm-hmm. But, I've been around a while, and I'm still dealing with myself as a leader and how I see myself and how other people see me. Mm-hmm. And I'm not entirely convinced yet.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Mr. Rojas?
Yeah, I think leadership is difficult. The activity of leadership is difficult. Mm-hmm. And for most positions that we prepare for, we're taught a certain set of skills, and we gain confidence, and we have some expertise in that skill. So to take on a position or to exercise leadership, I don't know if there's any type, I don't know if there's someone who does it right every time. So Dr. Matson just mentioned he's still trying to figure it out, and we all are. And so I think people know that it's risky, and they're not quite sure. And I think that's true. Leadership is hard, and there's no one way to do it every time, and you'll never get it right 100% of the time. So I think it's natural for people to steer away from it.
So then how do we encourage people to take on that leadership position and then to think about it as working as a team instead of just I am leader, and you're really working with a group of people, and that everyone has a role in contributing to change or contributing to moving an idea forward?
Well, maybe if people went into it knowing that they don't know everything there is to know about leadership and in that specific situation. So maybe if they took an approach that required them to learn more and to observe more and to diagnose more, they might walk away with a slightly better understanding on how to begin to make progress. So maybe going into it knowing that there's not there's not a magic bullet, there's not one exact way to get it done.
There's multiple ways.
Multiple ways.
Yeah, I think so. It's just it's too onerous to look at a leadership opportunity and to look in the mirror and take on the full responsibility for that. I would even drop back, if we're interested, drop back just a little bit. If we're interested in encouraging people to take on leadership roles, and this is going to happen in the context of some office structure or organizational structure, the development of relationships within the immediate group will create a sense of team, and that you're not dangling out there all by yourself and you have to risk all this stuff on your own, that you do have other resources within the purview of your coworkers to help steer you in the right direction if you're unsure, or to learn a little more before you make a decision. So I think that the whole team notion is very important. But once you've built the relationships and you have a team, then I think the important thing is to create a space for people to feel empowered to make choices, to drive a project, whatever the leadership task might be, but to put people in there and encourage, to give courage to them to at least try it. And if you're a perceptive manager and you have people working with you, then one of the things you have to be able to do is find out, from getting to know them better, what their next developmental task might be in terms of their own growth and their own empowerment. And then you want to create a situation where they can expand into that space and take on the responsibility. But you do that with the support of a team.
Absolutely. Did you want to make a comment
Yeah, I think
on that?
I would say there's a pretty big difference between leadership, the activity of leadership, and the position of a leader or a manager. So I think people get those confused quite often. So you take on a leadership position and you somehow think, well, because I'm the leader now, I'm in charge, I can solve all the problems. And there's going to be some problems that you can solve that you're going to be helpful for, but there's also going to be a lot of problems that you don't have any clue on how to solve. Nobody does. So the difference between a task and getting something done is something that can be taught to you. And another one about how do we make sure all the employees are happy and there's a good culture. There's not exactly a little memo that you can send out to say, hey, everybody, we want you to be happy. There's some work, there's some learning that you have to do. And so I think that confusion can get in the way of exercising leadership, and it can cause you to maybe stumble, and it can cause people to get frustrated, and it can cause people to say, yeah, I don't think I want to take that position on. Maybe they've seen bad quote-unquote leaders in their organizations, and they think, I don't want to be set up for that.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, now, how do you build good relationships? Because, again, that is a good skill set to have,
Sure.
and not everyone knows how to do
Right.
that. And so are there tips that you might want to, again, this is a lessons learned panel,
Yeah.
so how do you build that if that may or may not be your skill set? Because again, having done this before, sometimes students or community members might say, well, oh my gosh, that's not my skill set to build relationships. And as for me, I love building alliances and collaborations, but for some people, it may not be.
Well, I think that the ultimate coworker relation, or the ultimate supervisor-supervisee relationship, is built on trust. But trust is something that's earned over time. And if you're going to enter into the development of relationships and feel confident about the relationships you have with other people in the context of your organization, I think you have to have transparency. I think you're going to have to be comfortable enough with yourself to say, look, this is who I am, this is what I think. I'm not going to be right all the time. As Sean says, you're going to fail. You hope you bat 500 or better on most of the decisions you make. But so you have to have transparency. Then I think you have to have integrity, and the integrity simply means that you're going to do what you say you're going to do. If you don't have that kind of integrity, then people aren't going to be able to. What we're searching for here is trust. So, from my point of view, the formula that works best is to have the transparency, to be honest with other people, to have integrity, to let them know that you follow through, you do the things that you say you're going to do. And out of those two, you build trusting relationships. And when a person that you trust walks into your office or you walk into their office, the dynamic is completely different compared to a person you may not trust. And it's so much more productive if you're in a trusting relationship.
Absolutely. Did you want to comment on
Yeah,
that?
I think one way that I agree, building trust is useful, and what might be helpful for individuals to think about other people and try to imagine themselves in their shoes. We always say, try to put yourself in other people's shoes. I think oftentimes we say that, but really do it. Really think about what would it really feel like if I was the employee, I was, the entry-level person, and my boss was telling me this. Because good intentions, as a boss or a manager or as a leader, those aren't going to necessarily translate to the people that you're talking to. And so putting yourself in their position to get multiple perspectives of what's happening. And I think that's a skill that you can practice. You can be cognizant of it, and you can remember that each time when somebody might be upset towards you, or just when you're giving direction. It can help you understand how that person might feel. And that's something I have to work on all the time in my marriage, and sometimes I imagine I get it wrong, but the more I think about it, the more I actually stop to just consider it for a second, will help me make progress and will help people make progress.
Well, so now how have you dealt with working with difficult colleagues or being in difficult situations? Because that is something that comes up a lot when you're in a leadership position, working with conflict. And some people run away from conflict, and some people run towards conflict. I'm the kind of person, I run towards conflict. I don't like to avoid it, because to me that causes more problems. So what's your advice for that?
I would say assume that you own some of the problem. That part of the problem is in your behavior, your reaction, your words. Don't assume. Just know that part of it's your fault. If you assume some of it is your fault, maybe 50% of it is your fault, and begin to work from there. And instead of focusing on the other person. If you care enough, you might consider changing your behavior, changing your approach, changing your words. And that's a useful place to start. Oftentimes, if you overlook that you don't have any ownership over the problem, I think it will set you up for failure.
Very good.
I really like that. I really like that discussion.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, that's a great idea. I had no idea that so many personnel issues would wind up in my office, which they do frequently. And I've come to a point where I think I really can work more effectively with those personnel issues. And in addition to assuming that if it's a disagreement with you, that you have to own part of that problem. If it's a disagreement between two other people and not with you, then in either case, I think it's important to separate the personal from the professional. We can disagree as professional people, okay? And it doesn't have to harm our personal relationship. And that's the dynamic paradox of coworker relations is that you have this personal as well as this professional quality to these relationships, and both are important. But if we recognize that we own some of the problem and that you're going to always separate out the personal from the professional, then you can get past a lot of roadblocks that come from strong feelings and strong emotions in personnel issues.
Yeah, separating yourself from the role, it can be helpful in those situations to where leaning into some conflict, knowing that it's for a different purpose. It's not about the relationship between the two individuals. It's about the organization, the job, whatever the task at hand. It's about that as opposed to individuals. Now, it's easier said than done because oftentimes emotions will come up. But I think if you go into it knowing that this is my role, that might be helpful to not take it so personal.
That's wonderful advice. Now, again, back to the lessons learned. So what has been your greatest lesson learned in your leadership positions that you've had?
I think my greatest lesson has been the way that I communicate to people. I want to keep a lot of things in my head. I want to kind of go with the flow and think of some ideas, and I think, oh, well, don't worry about the small details, don't worry about all of these other things. And that's energizing for me, but it's not energizing for other people. So in order for other people to be energized, they need to have some information, have a little bit more direction and instruction. And so knowing that there's other ways that people learn, other ways that people like to receive information is helpful. So I don't like to send long emails, but some people need some emails and they need that communication. So varying my communication and thinking about how other people, what energizes other people when I communicate to them has been something that I've learned in my career so far.
And did people give you that feedback, or how did you learn that?
I think, I got the feedback by people either being frustrated, people telling me, hey, I don't know what's going on. And I admit, I still struggle with it at times because it's not my default to do. But it's important if I want those people to be engaged and for them to be energized. And so I need to think about their interest and kind of their favorable method, and I definitely think about that as I move forward with communication.
Well, just one follow-up question. Do you give your people that you work with some kind of an assessment? I'm big on assessments.
No, I guess we have an assessment in our organization, a 360 assessment that we can take. So I think that's one way to get that feedback. I also think just asking some frank questions about how am I doing, what concerns do you have, and making that feel like there's no repercussions to give negative feedback or constructive criticism. So I think you can hopefully accept that criticism and make it a safe place to give that kind of feedback.
That's wonderful. Thanks for sharing.
I like what Sean said about communication.
Yes.
But, I like to put it in the context of, two things for me that I've learned as I look back, is that whenever possible, and this is just sort of an efficiency law, I guess, if at all possible, never touch anything twice. Don't go back to it. Mm-hmm. If what's holding you up the first time you see it is making a decision, make the decision.
Wow.
And so don't put it aside and then go back and visit it and go back and visit it again. The other thing that happens with communication is if I want people to be engaged in a process that I think is lively and energizing, your words, inside of the organization, I want to be able to close the loops as quickly as possible. So if something comes in, I want to be able to make a decision, get more input, send something back immediately, and so I call that closing the loop. And I want to close those loops as quickly as I possibly can. And I know this makes me kind of an email ogre. I sit on my emails constantly. But I just don't want those loops to be open. And I can tell you from years of experience in positions in our college and in our university, sometimes administrators' desks are like black holes. Things go in and nothing ever comes out. Mm-hmm. And I so hated that when I was working in the organization at another level. And not all of my colleagues who are in administrative positions were like that, but a number of them are. And I think what happens is that then that disaffects people from this process that you want to have be an energetic process. And so in order to keep the dynamism alive in that process, I think you have to close those loops as quickly as possible.
I totally agree. Now, as we bring our panel to a close, what leadership advice would you leave with students or community members as they go into the workforce? Because I think this is really a kind of a critical thing, because the millennials are scared, not necessarily scared, but as they move in, you've got different generations. You've got millennials going into the workforce with different generations. You've got the me generation, Generation X, and you've got people who are baby boomers who are still in the workforce. So what advice would you give to them as they're mixing with these different generations? And they may be those people's bosses. What advice would you give to them as they're mixing?
The advice I would give to them is that distinguishing the difference between work where there's a single right answer, where there's an expert that you can hire, to know that work, do it well, do it efficiently, get good at it, refine that skill. And then this idea of leadership, about mobilizing people, energizing people, that's a different skill. There's some overlap, but for the most part, it's a different skill, and this skill requires learning, asking questions, being curious. That's much different than the technical expertise type of approach where there's a right answer. So being curious, asking questions, knowing that there's not one single approach to make progress would be the advice that I would give to people in these leadership positions as they enter the workforce.
Excellent.
Yeah, I like the idea of being able to just encourage them to take a shot at doing some leading, realizing that you don't have to be perfect at that, and that we all recognize that there are, as Sean says, we've got technical leadership and decisions to make, we've got adaptive leadership and decisions to make, and those adaptive ones are the ones you make up as you go along, and you learn as you go through it, but you have to be open to that kind of a model. And if you can point that out to young people who are coming into your organization, that you're going to learn this as you go through it, and it is trial by fire, but you'll come out the other side smarter. Sometimes you'll be wrong, but you'll come out the other side smarter, and you'll come out with more confidence.
Well, what about this issue of failure? This has come out in some of the other discussions we've had, and I wanted to get you guys' take on this issue of failure, because we don't always like to fail. We like to try things, and then it blows up in our face. And so how do we handle that as leaders? I mean, how have you handled that as leaders? Because I'm sure you all have been successful and everything's always gone well, and you don't have any of those stories.
Well, I like to think, in my organization, we like to think of things that are failures as collecting data and experiments. So the more data you collect, which might look like a few failed experiments, but if you're collecting information, you're collecting data, you're learning, that's useful. And as long as you're using that information and carrying it forward, it's not bad to fail. In fact, if you don't fail, it might mean that you are not collecting enough information, that you're not learning enough. So I think we should aspire to fail more often, and I believe if we do that, we will learn more, and we'll achieve more. And it's not easy to fail, and it can hold us back, and it can make us look bad, make us feel bad. But I think getting over it. So don't call it a failure, call it an experiment.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that failures probably are tied to poor decisions, and poor decisions then produce outcomes that you didn't intend and you don't want to have happen. But in leadership positions, regardless of whether those are lower or middle or higher level leadership positions, one of the things that you realize right away is you're asked to make a lot of decisions in rapid fire mode, and you're going to make a lot of them in a single day, many within a single hour, and you're not going to bat 1,000. And if the strikes are the ones that are your failures, then you learn to accommodate to those. And how would you be if you didn't make a mistake? I mean, I never really mind, even in my position as a dean, looking at somebody and saying, you know, I really made a mistake and I'm awfully sorry about that, and I'll learn from that, and I'll be a lot wiser the next time around. You know, I think it's so important in interpersonal relationships to be honest. Remember what I said about authenticity, but beyond that is to be able to say you're sorry, and you have to be forgiven. I mean, that's a part and parcel of any kind of high quality relationship is forgiveness. And we're all human after all. And that means that we're prone to error, we're prone to mistakes, and we're prone to failure. Say you're sorry, and hopefully they'll forgive you.
Let's hope so. Now, any closing remarks that you want to leave with the community or with the students that you'd like to leave with them about lessons learned? Or?
Well, you mentioned earlier about this idea of anybody can lead anytime, and I truly believe that leadership is action. It's doing something, and anybody can try something and do something to make progress on something they care about. So I think if you want, consider yourself a leader, if you like, and use that to create action, to do something. And you always have that opportunity anytime, regardless of who you are and where you're at.
Very good.
Yeah, I think my parting shot would be that if you're not sure of your leadership skills, or if you will be a good leader someday, one of the important things to do is listen to other people. Don't listen to yourself. Don't listen to the self messages that you have, but listen to other people. Look at your own past. Figure out what people have asked you to do, or positions you've been in, where you've made successes and where you haven't. I think a lot of us tend to ignore the reality of the data that we are given in our life, and then we wind up hurting ourselves and our leadership potential because we haven't paid attention.
Well, thank you for joining us on this dynamic panel of leadership and lessons learned. This has been absolutely fabulous. The panel has done exactly what I wanted them to do, and I have learned so much myself. Thanks for joining us.